Adjusting the valves now. Okay, we've got the gas tank off, got the plastic out, plastic off, the battery's out. The battery doesn't have to be out, but I'm servicing the battery. So the next thing I'm going to do is pull spark plugs out, since when you adjust the valves it's usually at the 6,000 mile maintenance when you should be replacing the spark plugs anyway. You must remove at least one spark plug in order to turn the motor over so you can get to the right place to adjust the valves. Okay, having stripped the bike down some, we're going to take the valve cover off. You can just loosen these a little bit and then you can take them off with a open end wrench or box wrench, or sometimes your fingers. See, once you get them loose, you can do it by hand. There's 6 bolts. Okay, so now I've got all 6 bolts loose. I'm going to pull the valve cover off. This is kind of tricky. Get these hoses in the way. Sometimes it helps to get the bolts in the back out so that you can get the valve cover out of your way. Now, some people remove the valve cover completely. I just kind of let it hang out of the way. Okay.
Okay, now.
Okay. So this is a 22 millimeter wrench. Goes right on here, and all you got to do is knock it loose. And this is the chain tensioner. So what we're going to do is remove the chain tensioner, the bolt that holds the chain tensioner, and then kind of push on that with your finger, or you can pull on the cam chain and it pops out, and there is the actual chain tensioner. The flat side goes in and there's a piece of plastic in there that this thing pushes up against the chain, but you can see how the cam chain now has some slop in it. Okay, so this bolt is the cover bolt for where the crank stop bolt goes. So we've got to get this thing out. Now this motor's full of oil, but since there's very little oil in the sump, really nothing comes out. Okay, now this is on a Classic, the bolt that holds the back of the gas tank, and you can see how I ground the tip to be kind of rounded. Let me get the other bolt. So you can see how the end of this bolt is no longer flat, it's slightly rounded. It shouldn't come to a full point, but it's got to be rounded to about half of the diameter of the bolt in order to fit in the slot in the crank. So I figure I always have this with me, and it's always easy to find. I don't lose this. Now what I'm going to do is screw this bolt into the hole where the cover was, and the idea is to screw the bolt in until it just barely bottoms out. Okay, now when the bolt bottoms out, you want to back it off a little bit, because, bring the camera up here.
Yes.
Okay, so you can see that there's a little line in the cam wheel here, and another one here, and there's one in the cam wheel here, and another one here. Now these lines need to be in as close as they can be in alignment to this surface here. Can you see the cam lobe here?
Yes.
Okay, the cam lobe is pointed up, and this cam lobe, when we rotate the engine around a little bit more, will also be pointed up. You can see how when these lines are all parallel, the cam lobes will either be up or they won't. If they're not up, then the engine is not at the right place to valve adjustment.
Started.
Okay, so at this point I put it in second gear, and I've got a wrench on the crank stop bolt, and I back it out a little bit. And if you look at the cam wheels, you can see those lines coming around. And every time I move it a little bit, I take the crank stop bolt. Aha! Now, suddenly the wrench turned a turn and a half, and the crank is now locked. Okay, you don't want to really torque this down, just want to snug it in there. So now the crank is locked, and no matter what I do with the rear wheel, the cams aren't moving. So now the motor's locked and we can start to check the valves. Okay, we moved the camera to the other side of the bike. Now, I don't know if you can see this or not, but I've got two feeler gauges out. For the Classic, it's 4 thousandths and 6 thousandths. 4 thousandths, the tighter one's for the intake, and the bigger one, I'm sorry, both valves are the same. There's a minimum clearance and a maximum clearance, so it's a go, no-go test. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that the 4 thousandths goes in all the valve between the cam and the shim, and that the 6 thousandth does not. So here we go. Okay, now this is pretty tight, and I think this one's too tight. I can't really get the shim in there, so we're going to have to do the right front intake.
So this was 4,000.
This is the 4 thousandth.
Okay.
So now we're going to do the other exhaust. You can see how there's a slot here. Can you see the slot?
Yep.
Okay, it's a slot that the shim would go in. Okay, I'm pushing on this shim and I really can't slip it in there, so both my exhaust valves are too tight. Okay, now I'm going to check intake valve. Okay, 4 thousandth goes easily, and the 6 thousandth doesn't go. So that intake valve is good. And check the other one through the slot. It's better if I come around there. Go through the slot. Okay, the 4 thousandth goes. I don't know if you can see there's some drag there. And the 6th I'm sure won't go. Okay, so both of the exhaust valves are too tight, so now let's pull the cams out. Okay, so before you pull these bolts out, it's always a good idea to stuff a rag or paper towel down in there, because if you drop these bolts down in there, it's kind of difficult to get them out. So with a little something stuffed down in there, it's a sure thing that we won't lose them. Okay, so now, okay, these bolts, when they go back in, they're going to be Loctited. So you need a wrench to get them all the way out. You can't just take them out with your fingers. You can stop. Okay, so the cam carrier holder and chain top guide is now been removed. Okay, now we're going to remove 8 bolts to hold the cam carrier in place. I like to crack them all loose first, about a quarter turn or so, before actually removing any of them. I don't know that it makes that much difference, but it makes me happy.
Okay.
Okay, now I've got all the bolts loose, but before I remove the cam carriers, I'm going to take a little tie wrap. And I'm going to tie wrap the chain to the cam wheels. So what this is going to do is this will absolutely keep the cams from losing timing. It is possible to lose time at the bottom, but it's a lot less probable. So now with that like that, I can pull the top cam carrier out. Can lift the cam up. Lift the other cam up. Okay, with the cams up out of the way, I can pull the bottom carrier out. Okay. There we go. Okay, one thing I like to do is take the cams and a bungee, little tiny bungee cord, and tie them up out of the way. So when I'm working, I don't keep keep getting in my way. Okay, in this case, we know that both of these exhaust shims are too fat. So I need to just go with the next size thinner. That's why I didn't bother measuring it a bunch. Usually they never change more than one size at a time. So I'm going to try to lift this shim out with a pair of pliers. I'm probably not going to be successful. Okay, so the whole bucket's coming out. Okay, so this is the bucket that goes over the valve, and the shim's in the top. And popping the shim out's tricky. This is a scribe with a carbide tip, and I tend to have pretty good luck with that. But some people use air. Some people can do it with a little screwdriver. There's a shim. Okay. This is a shim set I scored on eBay for a good price. And this is a micrometer. So what I got to do is measure this shim, and then I printed out the chart. It's available on the FAQ that shows the millimeters and the inches because my micrometer is in inches. So I think you can see there. It looks like this is a 2.4 something, so it's either 4.0 or 4.5. I'm going to check it with a micrometer. Okay, so we measured 0.0962, so if you look here, 0.0965 is 245, and since this thing looks like it has a 4 on it, it looks like 2.4, we're going to go with a 2.40 shim. So I go to my shim box, and it's 3 down, and pick out a 2.40 shim. Okay, now that's a used shim, and it really doesn't matter which side goes where, but since this one's used, I'm going to put the side with the ink on it back on top of the bucket. So by using a smaller shim, I'll push that down in there, by using a smaller shim, I'm going to make some extra clearance. Did you get that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we're going to take the other exhaust bucket loose. Alright, here it is. And try to pop the thing out. Hey, one other. I've also had good luck with this tool. You can see how the shim is moving. There we go. Alright, so I got that out. Okay, so we measured this shim, and this one was a 240. So if I didn't have this big box of shims, what I could have done was taken the shim out of the left side exhaust valve and put it in the right side exhaust valve, and then all I got to do is buy one shim. But since I got the big box, I do it the easy way. Okay, so now we've got the buckets back in with the new shims in them, and what we're going to do is lift up the cams, put the bottom cam carrier back in, and you'll notice that there were pins there. If you look carefully before I stuck it in there. Okay, you want to push that down so it gets seated, and then we're going to set the cams back in their little depressions. Okay. Oh, I definitely lost time. Okay, so when I got the cams back in, I came back around and I looked and the lines are off. So that means I lost time. So the cam chain has come loose from the crank sprocket when I was jockeying stuff around. So what I need to do is pull the cams back out. Kind of jiggle the chain down there and pull them up and try it again and see what happens. So this time, well, I can't see.
Not quite.
I went the wrong way. Alright, so we're going to go the other way. Okay, so I can't fish the chain back around. So what I'm going to do is cut my tie wraps loose, and I'm going to pull a cam out, and I'm going to say, there's one tooth, there's a second tooth. Did it get better? No. Okay, 3 teeth. Oops. 4 teeth. Okay, it's almost there, but not quite. So that's a 5th tooth, and that looks pretty even there. So now I've moved it 5 teeth. I'm going to get the exhaust cam. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now you can see, I don't have them tied, but you can see that when the tensioner goes in, they'll all be in pretty close to a straight line. It really never looks perfect, but I know that that's going to be right. So now I'm going to put the top cam carrier top in there. All right, and I'm going to screw all these bolts in, but I'm not going to tighten them yet, because the thing is, the deal that goes on the end is what pulls the cam carriers into alignment. So I'm going to tighten up these bolts till they're just barely snug, and then I'm going to put the side deal on, and that pulls everything into alignment, and then I tighten the top ones back up.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to put the cam block back in. I'm going to put a drop of Loctite on the bolts here, and
Blue lock.
blue Loctite. I did shake it first. My rags have been removed, and that's poor shop practice, but do what I do, not what I say. We still rolling?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, these are supposed to be torqued to something. I don't know, I do a lot of stuff by feel. Just kind of snug them up. You got to remember it's a steel bolt that's going into aluminum, so you don't want to strip it or you bought yourself a lot of problems. So, okay. Got those guys tightened up. And now I'm going to put the chain tensioner back in. Okay, now the chain tensioner bolt is, there's a washer that's on it, but what I do is I just put the thing in there and screw it in. We've got to turn the motor over at least 1 full turn before we verify the valve adjustment, because what happens is some oil gets under the new shims and keeps them lifted up, and you get false readings unless you turn the motor over at least once. So what I do is I just put this in here, turn the motor over, check it again, then I'm going to take that back out and put some sealant on it. Okay, but before we do that, we got to tighten up the top ones. So there's 8 bolts on the top, and I'm going to snug them all. Again, I'm sure there's some torque spec on this, but I'm going to make them all just kind of snug, and then I'm going to go around and tighten them until I think they feel right. Okay, so what I got to do in order to turn it over is loosen the crank stop bolt. So I'm going to loosen the crank stop bolt up a bunch of turns. Okay, so I'm looking at the cam. Okay, so I'm checking the cams again and they're in the right position, and I'm going to tighten my crank stop bolt up again so that I make sure that I'm checking the timing in the right place. Okay, so now I got another turn and a half or so on my crank stop bolt, and I know that, okay, it's locked in place. Let me get my feeler gauges and check again. Okay, so we checked them again after rotating the engine around and everything's good. Now, what I like to do is wipe this mating surface off all the way around. And the thing is, there's a couple of pockets in the head where oil resides. So what I like to do is not change this $16 gasket every time, but just inspect it. And if you look at the edge of this gasket, you can see that the lip is still pretty good. It's not completely flattened out or anything. So I dip my finger in the oil reservoir there and get some of that almost clean oil and rub it all around this mating surface. Let's just stop it. Okay, so now we're going to put the valve cover back on. It's kind of tricky. Okay, and when you get it on there, what you want to do is look and make sure that the gasket hasn't popped out anywhere. And then you take your these things. Now you don't have to replace these every time. They're kind of expensive too. I've been using the same ones. I got 42,000 miles on this bike. Never changed them. So what you want to do with these is get them all in there, and you can see how the valve cover slops around. So you want to get them all in sort of finger tight before you start to tighten anything down. Okay, so I got all the screws back in, and before I tighten anything up, I want to wiggle this around with all the screws just in there slightly snugged, and make sure, looking at the gasket around the edge, that it's sticking out everywhere. And then I'm going to torque it using my calibrated torque wrench to the proper torque value, which is to say, just make it kind of snug. Okay, so after I got the valves all adjusted and got this thing buttoned up, I pulled this back out and I just put a little bit of black silicone sealant. You can use any color you want, just a little bit on the threads, and then snugged it. It's a big wrench, so it doesn't need to be real snug. It has a crush, it has a flat washer on there, and so I've never changed it, and it's not going to leak. It's going to be fine. The other thing that we need to do is remove the crank stop bolt completely and reinsert the plug. Okay, there's crank stop bolt. This is the plug. Now, in theory, you ought to change this copper washer, but again, I've been using the same one for about 40,000 miles, so I'm not going to worry about it. If it ever leaks, which I don't think it will, I'll get another copper washer. Oh, I like these ball tip wrenches. You can't use them to break stuff loose or tighten it completely up, but you can screw it in from a bad angle, which is great when you're doing stuff like around the brake pedal, or around the brake pedal on the other side when you're taking the counter shaft cover off, or when you're working around your shift lever. Okay, so that's in there. And that's snug. All right, now we're